Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you all from across the Pacific Ocean. I want to thank Stephen Trong, who invited me to speak today and has been such a wonderful partner with us in the research we do here at Stanford. I'd like to talk to you today about artificial intelligence in medicine, and particularly in medical imaging. And I want to start with a clinical case. And this is a case of a woman. She's in her 80s. She's had an aortic valve replaced and occasionally gets short of breath. And so you'll see this is her chest x-ray. Was read as normal. This is about 18 months ago. And then came back recently and had this chest x-ray and now has a large mass in her right chest. And if you look back at the prior, you can see there was in fact a small mass partially behind a rib and in among the pulmonary vessels that was missed. And I think a radiologist on his or her best day might see this, but for whatever reason, it was missed. And I show this case just to illustrate that as radiologists, we're fallible and we do need help. And these AI technologies are quite powerful and can sometimes call attention to things that we might miss. About 4% of our reports in the United States contain clinically significant errors. So these AI technologies, we all feel a special obligation to try to bring them to the clinical setting in the reading room. So what I'd like to do today is to just describe how we got to where we are. Why are we so excited about artificial intelligence right now? And then give you some examples of algorithms that illustrate the themes that I think we will see and are seeing coming out of the laboratory. And then talk about foundation models, ChatGPT, and the implications of those for medical imaging. And then finally, talk something about some of the challenges, bias, and safety. So this really all got started with something called ImageNet, which is a database of 14 million images that was compiled by my colleague here at Stanford in computer science, Fei-Fei Li. And it has over 21,000 different types of objects in the database. You can see different types of birds and trees and musical instruments and cats and dogs. And on the left here, an example is the garden spider. And you can see that it's illustrated in different orientations and with different backgrounds. So it's a challenging visual recognition task. And so the computer scientists use this as a kind of competition to see whose algorithm could recognize objects the best. And what I'm showing you now are the error rates in that competition over the years. So in 2010, 2011, the error rates were over 25%. In 2012 was the first time these new neural network methods were used, and you can see the error rate dropped dramatically. The next year, everyone was using these methods. The error rate went down again. It was won by a team from NYU. Then it was won by a team from Google, then from Microsoft, and then from teams from Asia, from Singapore and China. And you can see the error rates are starting to flatten out. And at that point, one of Fei-Fei's postdoctoral scholars decided he was going to learn all the cats and dogs and trees and spiders. And he took the test himself and found his error rate was about 5%. So we're getting near human level performance. And because the error rates were flattening out, they felt that they were extracting all the meaning they could from these images and needed a more challenging task. And so they then shifted to something called automated captioning, which is just the ability of the algorithm automatically, as you see here, to put bounding boxes around objects and to describe each of the objects. I first saw this when Fei-Fei presented it in 2015, when we had a celebration for our 50th anniversary of our computer science department here. And when I saw that, and when other radiologists saw that, I thought, that's what we do. We look at images, we find things, and we describe them in text. And so the application of these methods was immediately widely thought to be should be adopted in medicine. And what we're talking about, of course, is machine learning. So we feed the neural network examples of positives and negatives. So here we have a breast cancer on a mammogram, and we have a benign lesion on a mammogram. We feed these examples, and based on whether the neural network classifies the case correctly or incorrectly, we've then learned how to adjust the parameters a little bit in order to make it more likely that the algorithm will get the answer right the next time. And over many, many iterations, billions and billions, we get to near human level performance or expert level performance. And as a result, we now have an industry in radiology. This is in the United States. Our regulatory body, the Food and Drug Administration, has now approved, actually, they just released new data, over 900 different AI machine learning algorithms, and it continues to grow. And interestingly, radiology is leading the way. So we now have over 3/4 of the FDA cleared algorithms in the US are targeting radiologists. And that's certainly reflected at our radiology meetings. This is the logos of the over 100 companies who exhibited in the AI area, the AI showcase at a recent RSNA annual meeting. Why do I think we're leading the way? I think part of it is just that we have a lot of digital data over time. Here at Stanford, we have 1.6 petabytes of radiology data. We're producing 2 petabytes a year of digital pathology data. These neural networks are just very good at image processing. That's what they do best. And I think our data is a little more objective than something that might be, let's say, written in a chart based on what a patient is describing as a symptom or what a physician observes in conversation with a patient. We have some very objective data based on X-ray energy or other forms of energy that we project into the patient and either get transmission images or reflection transmission images. Okay, so that's why we're excited. These are amazing technologies. They can help us develop systems that are quite capable in a fairly short amount of time, inexpensively. So now I want to show you some examples of the technologies. And first, just want to say thank you to our Center for AI in Medicine and Imaging here at Stanford, Amy Center. We support over 150 Stanford faculty across 20 departments who are all working on the development of these algorithms for near to midterm clinical application. And also want to thank the people in my own laboratory who are working on many of these applications, particularly some of the natural language processing applications I'll mention later in the talk. So just to give you a sense of where these algorithms can apply throughout the imaging life cycle, even at test selection or test ordering, you can imagine algorithms that examine the chart and predict how likely it is that this study will be positive to help with the ordering decision. Image reconstruction and producing high quality images with lower radiation dose or lower imaging time. Imaging quality control, so the technologist at a console of a CT or an MR device doesn't always recognize some of the image quality problems, and so we could imagine algorithms that would help them recognize those problems before the patient leaves the scanner. Image triage, so when I'm on call, I may arrive, there might be over 100 images, and I would love to know which of those that are waiting for me might be more likely to have positive findings that I should look at first. Computer-aided detection would help us with that case I showed you earlier with the nodule that was missed. Classification, so radiologist who may be out of his or her comfort zone, let's say seeing a bone lesion on a chest x-ray or vice versa. And then reporting, making sure that we communicate and follow up on all the appropriate positive findings. So now just some examples. So this is the work of Bao Do, who is one of our radiologists at our Veterans Administration Hospital nearby. And he's developed algorithms that can detect common abnormalities on musculoskeletal x-rays. So can detect the level of arthritis in the right hip, can detect that there's a prosthesis in the left hip, and then uses those findings to populate a template of a report, as you see on the right there. So this kind of algorithm can automatically draft reports. And this has now been used on tens of thousands of patients across the VA system. It's a real time saver, and it helps with consistency of reporting, and it's something that radiologists are really drawn to. Another example is echocardiography. So this is the work of David Ouyang, published in Nature, and a large interdisciplinary group of cardiologists, computer scientists, radiologists. And this algorithm can calculate the ejection fraction on an echocardiogram automatically, and also can calculate, as you see on the right there, some other things like sex, weight, age, and height of the patients that we don't normally do as humans. But interestingly, so this is a work of David Ouyang, one of our cardiology fellows, who's now moved on to Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Southern California, but he went on to do a clinical trial of this algorithm, prospective randomized trial. Half of the patients had their echocardiogram, the ejection fraction estimated by the technologist. Half the patients had the ejection fraction estimated by AI, and then the attending cardiologist would look and see if the adjustments needed to be made. And here are the results of that trial. So You can see AI algorithm, these are seconds here, how long it took to do this. Or sorry, this is the number of studies where there was a substantial change. I'm sorry. And you can see that there were more changes needed to the sonographer's estimate than the algorithm. Here, these are seconds. And how long it took. Obviously, it didn't take any time for the AI algorithm to produce the estimate. And then you look at how much how often the cardiologist needed to change the result. And you can see that more changes were needed. I'm sorry, this is now time it took for the cardiologist to make these changes. And it took them more time to make changes for the sonographer because there were more changes to make. And so what you see is more accurate, at least by measuring by what the cardiology attending thought, and less time. So that's a nice technology that is ready for adoption. Another really interesting approach that we're seeing more of is opportunistic screening, extracting information from images that we would not normally do as radiologists. So on the left, we have a gated CT of the chest, and you can see the coronary calcium very nicely. In the United States, we do about 2 million of these a year. And now on the right, we have the same patient imaged for a different reason. It may have been a nodule follow-up or pneumonia or perhaps trauma. And because the study is not gated, the calcium is smudged. But we built an algorithm that could quantify the calcium on the non-gated CT. And then we went a step further. Again, I think that another theme here is just this assessment through randomized trials. And you can see that we took half the patients and notified them and their primary care doctors that they had this calcium. These patients who weren't getting their study for a coronary reason. And we took half the patients and just gave them routine care. So whatever the radiologist put into the report, that's what they received. And for those that were notified, their rate of statin use, these cholesterol-lowering drugs, which are the guideline recommended treatment, went way up from 7% up to over 50%. So we're really potentially saving lives by identifying, in the US, it would be 18 million patients who could have these scans analyzed by AI and have coronary disease detected that might otherwise be unknown. Okay, so those are just some examples. Now I want to move on to foundation models and large language models. So first, a definition. So foundation models are models where we take a large amount of data. So ChatGPT, it might be the entire internet of text, but it could be a large amount of images, speech, or multimodal data. We then use some self-supervision methods, and I'll tell you what that is in a moment, to create what's called a foundation model. So this model just knows a lot about some particular thing, whether it's text or images or some specific subset. And then we can adapt it to various tasks. So ChatGPT is adapted to question answering, but an imaging model might be adapted to image captioning, for example. So let me tell you about this self-supervision. This is kind of one of the magic steps, is that we've learned how to train these models on very large amounts of data without requiring labeling. And you can think of it as the computer playing a game with itself. So here, the algorithm has hidden some of the words and it's trying to guess the missing word. So shortness of breath, low grade, fever, elementary school, teacher, she appears anxious, so by making these guesses, again, over and over again, using that same algorithm to tweak the parameters a little bit each time to make it more likely that it makes the right guess, it gets very good at predicting what the next word should be. So that's kind of how the foundation model is made. And then we use the chat part really means that it's trained as a chat bot to create pleasing responses for humans. It's, in a way, you can think of this as creating a good bedside manner. So we can prompt it by saying, what is the meaning of life? And because it's a probabilistic system, it will create with multiple different responses to that. And then we ask humans to rate the responses, whether they like them or don't like them as much, to rank them. And in fact, what we can do is train another algorithm to predict how the human will respond with some human rating data as training data, and have those two AI algorithms interact with each other. And as a consequence, these systems get very, very good at creating very pleasing text explanations for humans. So what are the consequences of that for medicine? To illustrate that, I'd like to show you an experiment that was done at University of California, San Diego. And what they did is there's a forum on the internet called Ask Doc, where patients can go to ask medical questions and doctors can go to answer those questions. And so they took some of these questions and they fed them to ChatGPT. So here's an example. I splashed bleach into my eye, which now feels irritated and dry. Am I going to go blind? And here's what the response that a doctor gave on that forum. This is on Reddit, one of the forums on the internet. And then they fed it to ChatGPT. Here's ChatGPT's explanation. I'm sorry to hear that you got bleach splashed in your eye. So it's very detailed, some empathy there. Then in a blinded fashion, they asked a panel of experts to rate these answers, not knowing which was the real physician and which was the chatbot. And they found that the chatbot's explanations were rated higher for quality. And in fact, they were rated higher for empathy as well. So it just gives you a sense of the power of these technologies to create pleasing explanations. So that's the good part. What are some of the limitations, challenges? Well, there are inherent limitations. So these data are just, ChatGPT is trained on the entire internet. So the probability of a disease is going to be related to whether that disease gets discussed a lot on the internet, potentially. That's not always a good thing. These are probabilistic systems. They will give you the most likely answer, even if they don't have a very good sense of what the right answer is. So if it's 51% likely and 49% possibly wrong, it will go ahead and try. And so we hear these things about hallucinations, confabulations, or making things up. They're not very good at structured tasks like planning and mathematics that require complex reasoning skills. And so we've done some things to combat that. What we're working on in the lab are things like retrieval augmented generation. And that just means we're supplementing the great conversational abilities of these chatbots with information we trust, whether it's from a database, whether it's from a website that we trust, so that's more likely to give accurate explanations. And then we're also just very worried about, how do we know when these are working well? How do we actually evaluate them, given that they're just producing free text? That's not an easy problem. So we think about that quite a bit in the lab. All right, so I'd like to give you a sense of how these models will likely be used in medicine using three approaches. I think these three approaches are the most probable. So first, small language models fit for purpose. So these are models that we build, let's say, a specific purpose to summarize a radiology report. So we can build a model in the lab specifically to do that. And those models tend to be more accurate than if we were to ask, let's say, ChatGPT to summarize a radiology report, which it can do quite well. But it tends to be not quite as good, but that's going to democratize this technology. So places that maybe don't have research labs that do this kind of work can still use ChatGPT for that purpose, and it's relatively inexpensive and relatively effective. So many other healthcare organizations will have access to that. And then finally, something we haven't seen yet that I'm very excited about is, rather than using ChatGPT that's trained on the entire internet, can't we train one of these large models on a large amount of high-quality healthcare data so that it can give us answers that we trust? So that would be a kind of ChatGPT moment, how we all felt when we first saw the performance of these new systems, with the unexpected accuracy on tasks that we in medicine care about. So understanding images or understanding text. So I'm looking forward to that, and we're working towards that, and I'll show you that in a minute. Okay, I'm going to give you examples now of each of these three. So let's look at small language models, or these fit-for-purpose models. This is work that I did in collaboration with Pranav Rajprakar's lab at Harvard. And so this is the training procedure. In the purple box there, we have a network that encodes information from images, and we do some self-supervised training. And then we do the same thing with text. We have an encoder for text. And then we have a third neural network in the orange here that's just trying to figure out whether the text matches the image. Is this the report that describes what's seen in this image? And so we feed these algorithms matched and mismatched pairs of images and text. And over time, these neural networks get very good at encoding information about text encoding information about images, and determining whether the text matches the image. So that's the training procedure. Then, when we want to use this in clinical practice, we can take a new image, never been seen before, and we have that neural network that encodes information from that image. We use that trained neural network that we just trained, the purple box. Then we create artificial prompts. So a positive prompt might be pneumonia is present in the right lower lobe, and a negative might be there's no evidence of pneumonia. We encode both of those prompts using the neural network that was trained to encode information about medical text. And then we use that contrastive learning piece that tells us whether the text matches the image, and we see which text prompt is a better match. And here we see that the negative prompt is a better match, so we'd say this chest x-ray has no evidence of pneumonia. And it's kind of amazing, but this method of training actually produces algorithms that are as good as clinical experts, and we've published that. As you can see, the publication there shows that this is as accurate as clinical experts. Okay, now let's talk about how we might adapt ChatGPT or use it out of the box. And one really great radiology example here in the United States is patients now have access, digital access to their radiology reports. And I can tell you from my own family, when patients get their reports, they have a lot of questions like, what is a mild intrasubstance degeneration in the posterior horn of the medial meniscus? We had previously built in the lab a technology called RadGraph, which can extract concepts from radiology text. We then take those concepts and feed them to ChatGPT and say, please explain this at the level of an 8th grader. And it gives us these wonderful explanations that have analogies like, it's kind of like when your favorite pillow gets a little flat, but still works fine. So this is a really nice way that radiologists can engage more with our patients and provide reports and help them be more engaged in their care because they have a better understanding of their reports. All right, lastly, I want to talk about how we might build these models using high-quality medical data. And to illustrate that, I've shown here the size of the training data for models inside and outside of medicine. So the medical models in purple, the non-medical models in blue. And you can see this is a log scale, so it's over 100 times more training data for the text models outside of medicine today. And that's the size of the training data is thought to be one of the major factors that produces great accuracy for these systems. And the same is true for images. The largest imaging training set is about 16 million images. Outside of medicine, it's about 6 billion images. But we can substantially close that gap just using the images that we have at my institution, Stanford Healthcare, and I'm sure the same would be true in your area as well. And so you could imagine starting to build very capable, very large models using high quality medical training data. And so that's what we're doing here. We're doing this in the lab. And just to give you one example, this is a system called, this is a system called Checks Agent, which uses 8 million chest x-rays for its training. Our algorithm that we trained that way is the red bar. The blue bars are some of the other high quality models. And I think you can see that just the fact that we're using these self-supervision methods on very large training sets, high quality medical data, leads to high performance. This is some similar work done with Akshay Chowdhury's lab, really primarily out of his lab. Same kind of technique, but using cross-sectional images. And so you can see the blue here is the accuracy on various, to detect various abnormalities. Using older methods and then using our method, the green and the orange, you can see is superior in most cases. So using large amounts of training data really does work. Okay, we talked about foundation models. I just want to spend a minute or two on bias and safety and challenges at the end here. So first of all, we have a new initiative at Stanford, which is called Responsible AI for Safe and Equitable Health, or RAISE Health. So we're thinking a lot about these issues. How do we make sure that these algorithms are implemented responsibly across research, education, and patient care? And I find that this paper, which was published in Annual Review of Biomedical Data Science, to be a great framework for thinking about bias and potential issues as we develop these models. I don't have time to go through all of this in detail. I recommend this paper to you, but I'll just talk about a couple now. So first, let's talk for a minute about problem selection and data. So problem selection has to do with building diverse interdisciplinary teams and making sure we have the right people in the room and that we collect the right data in advance to make sure we can answer the question for all the different subgroups of patients. Just a word about medical data. So that ImageNet database I showed you earlier has images that are 224 by 224 pixels, of course. And then if some of these, you may have seen these algorithms that can actually produce images from a description. So if I say, show me a hippopotamus in a lily pond in the style of Van Gogh, it might produce that image. That's about the size of an abdomen CT. But of course, our CTs contain 50 slices or more. That's before IV contrast. We have the dynamic study, then we have the post-contrast. We have to compare to prior, and then we have to relate it to all the other data in the patient's chart. So medical data is different. It's more complicated, and that creates some really interesting research questions. At Stanford, we've really tried to lead the way in terms of publicly releasing data sets. We've released now over 20 data sets, including some work we did collaboratively with VinBrain with over 225,000 chest x-rays and chest x-ray reports. But that's really not enough. We analyzed in the US where the training data is coming from for many of these AI imaging models and found that most of the data comes from just 3 states. So we're not getting a good answer for diversity across our country, and really the same is true across the world. So I'm really excited about problems like this Medical Imaging and Data Resource Center, which is funded here in the US by federal government dollars. And we gather data from across the country, multiple sites, and try to get diverse data sets. And so you can see here that the distribution of data matches our census pretty nicely. And this is just one dimension. There are many dimensions of that, but often matches well. So I think that's part of the future. And then just talk a minute about post-deployment considerations. I think those are important. So we often talk about human and machine complementarity because they may each have similar accuracy in what they detect, but it's a different subset of disease. And so human plus machine is often better than either one alone. But I want to highlight that we haven't really studied exactly what's the best way that these algorithms interact with humans. So this is just one example. This is a mammography example. And on the left, this is an algorithm that's helping to detect abnormalities. And we have 3 different expertise levels. Red is inexperienced, blue is moderately experienced, gray is very experienced. When the algorithm is correct, all of those humans do well. When the algorithm is incorrect, it really has an outsized influence on the less experienced radiologists. So that's really important. We need to think more about how we interact with these algorithms. Another thing to consider is just how data can change over time. So with a new device, we've seen changes in how our algorithms perform. With a new clinic opening up, with a new patient population, the algorithm's performance can change, and certainly a new disease. So we had a pneumonia algorithm we had to retrain when COVID came. So these are very important, and our regulatory bodies are looking at this closely. So I guess I'll close just by saying this is something that I've thought about quite a bit. Will AI replace radiologists? I think that most of this worry has passed, but I think the answer is no, and radiologists who use AI will replace radiologists who don't, because this technology is so powerful. And we could really replace radiologists with any other profession in medicine or outside of medicine. And if you want to hear more about that, you can read this editorial, which I wrote in 2019. It's been a pleasure being with you. I look forward to answering your questions a little later in this session. Thank you very much.